Hello, everyone. Welcome to the episode of the BT Show. Big one today. I'm here to talk about the Phantom Menace, do a little bit of a legacy review, kind of all encompassing. I saw it in theaters. I have a lot of thoughts that I wasn't expecting to have. So let me just get into it. I guess I'll start first with my connection to the movie um, before I start with how my thoughts maybe changed and honestly greatly improved watching this movie again in theaters. So I was 6 years old in 1999 when this movie came out. It was never a movie I loved. It was always a movie I considered kind of mediocre. I always thought this movie was kind of like the weird stepchild of the prequels. I'm a huge fan of the prequels. I'm one of the biggest defenders you'll ever meet. So this is the first time you're watching my channel and you're a fellow prequel lover. You'll probably like my Star Wars videos. If you don't like the prequels, you probably won't. That's just a warning. But continuing on, as much as I like the prequels, I always thought this movie was kind of like the weird stepchild because it always seemed disconnected from the other two. Although I would say most people probably consider this the second best after Revenge of the Sith, but because Attack of the Clones had Hayden Christensen, I feel like that was the big connection. And it also didn't have Liam Neeson, and it didn't have Darth Maul. I thought those were some really, really big connections. And then also, just the way the movies look, I felt like 2 and 3 looked very, very similar as well. So just starting right off the bat, I didn't love this movie. I wasn't a huge pod racing guy. I love Darth Maul. I love Qui Gon. But I always felt this movie felt flat growing up in a way similar to how Captain America: The First Avenger kind of fell flat for me. I would kind of just rewatch this movie over and over again, trying to love it, and I just wouldn't. It would be good, but it wouldn't be great. Although the ending with the Darth Maul scene kind of was always great. I mean, I've watched that movie 1,000 times. I mean, that scene 1,000 times, Duel of the Fates. Um, but I guess as I entered this movie, I never realized how long it had been since I watched this movie start to finish. It had been a very, very long time. I'd never watched it on a big screen since 1999. So going to this movie, I am not a big person who goes to re-releases. I don't think I ever have, actually. I'm not someone who even sees a movie twice in theaters. I rarely do. I don't think I have since Endgame. Maybe I saw No Way Home twice. I don't remember. I don't think I did. It's possible I did. But I had the pass at Regal, the unlimited pass, so I figured why not I'd go. So that's kind of the background. Now let me get into my. So the first thing I was so surprised about was just how locked in I was at this movie. I went into the theater. I actually had to go to the bathroom. I remember specifically I had to pee, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get through the opening scene because there's like lightsaber stuff right off the bat, and then when it slows down, I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I didn't end up going to the bathroom. I think until like after the pod racing scene. I think maybe even farther into the movie. So it was just unbelievable. I was expecting to get bored in this movie. I never got bored. So that was the first thing that stuck out, was just how locked in I was. So many things stand out in this movie. But I guess I'll start with the biggest thing that really stood out watching this again is really how this movie could have been 100% a complete movie without Anakin Skywalker showing up at all. That entire sequence could have been different on in Mos Eisley, and you could have had an entire movie where he doesn't show up. It was almost shocking to see how he was kind of. It almost seemed like forced into this movie. The movie's going along. The movie's going along. They set up all the politics, which is also a huge part. You really understand the politics and what's going on so much more. Obviously, at my age than I was at 6 and 7. It honestly becomes a little bit more interesting, in my opinion, and I kind of feel like they could have gone more into that. Okay, but you're like, okay, there's this blockade, and Naboo is struggling, and there's the Queen. The Jedi's are ambassadors. They're trying to sneak her off planet. She's at risk. So it makes sense. And then seemingly out of nowhere, they pigeonhorn Anakin Skywalker. He comes out of nowhere. They're just looking for parts, and he just is working in the shop. And then from there on, really the rest of the prequels become an Anakin Skywalker, prequel story. So you really could have had an entire movie where Anakin doesn't show up, and I think would have been totally fine. You can argue it's better. It totally changes the movie, and it really, really stood out to me because when you haven't seen it in a long time, start to finish, I've watched the trailers, I've watched the marketing, I've watched the scenes. and you really forget how long into the movie it was before he gets introduced. Something else that definitely stood out to me from when I was a kid till now is growing up, I was never really a huge pod racing guy. I thought it was kind of cool, but I didn't love it. I, always felt like this movie kind of took a sharp turn. It took a huge chunk out of the movie. I never really found myself watching the pod racing scene of all the Star Wars scenes that I go back and watch on YouTube. I never really watched the pod racing scene. I loved it in this movie. I don't know what changed for me. Um, I thought maybe just seeing how much it aged incredibly well. The pod racing scene is awesome. What's good about it rewatching it too is that if it's not for you, you can totally just skip it and go ahead. You don't miss anything. But if you do like it, it just becomes like a Star Wars racing Fast and Furious movie. And this is why George Lucas is a billionaire, because obviously that spawned into games, which spawned into toys, which spawned into all this other stuff. And just constantly throughout the movie, there are just pinpoints of where you can spawn off into other things. Another part of this movie that I really loved is just noticing the cameos. He sprinkles in the cameos throughout the movie, so you get R2D2, cameos, and kind of has a surprise entrance on the ship when he fixes it. C3PO, surprise entrance, kind of in Anakin's house. You weren't expecting it. Jabba the Hutt, surprise cameo entrance at the pod racing scene. Um, I mean, even to some extent, Yoda, who you might think, oh, maybe he's in this movie, maybe not. He comes in. He's a character, obviously, from the original trilogy. So you're constantly getting original trilogy characters and references kind of thrown in throughout the movie. Even going to Mos Eisley, when you're there, you're like, oh, shit, I know this place. This is from the beginning. This is from the first movie. So I felt like I totally forgot that aspect of the movie is you're thinking to yourself, okay, it's 1999 opening night. I'm watching this movie. Let's drop in all these Easter eggs. I thought that one of my huge gripes of the movie, and I didn't realize this as much. It's actually a thing that I loved about it. Ironically, is the thing that I probably dislike the most. My biggest gripe of the movie is how many cutscenes there are during the fight with Darth Maul, during Duel of Fates. I couldn't believe how many times they cut from Darth Maul to the B plot. There's always a B plot in Star Wars. There has to be one. But in a lightsaber fight, just stop cutting. It was ridiculous how much they cut. When you go to episode 2, when they're fighting Count Dooku, they don't just randomly cut to other shit. I thought the fact that they started cutting during the Darth Maul fight was really, really terrible. And I totally forgot about this because watching it on YouTube, the edits on YouTube, they don't cut, they just kind of compile together all of the scenes. So I totally forgot how many scenes there are in a Darth Maul movie, how many cuts there are during the Darth. One of the shocking things when watching this movie just in real time in the theater is you start to realize, as much as this movie was shit on in 1999, how much better this movie is than pretty much anything you can see in theaters from then until now on just the average week. I mean, I know this week there's a bunch of good stuff like, Godzilla Kong and Monkey Man and Planet of the Apes. So maybe this week isn't the best week to say it. But in general, The Phantom Menace is so much better, especially if you're a Star Wars fan, but just in general, than a majority of the movies you're going to get. So the fact that it was so shit on is really just crazy because it was a great theater experience. I've seen the movie so many times, and it was still great. So the fact that people are shitting on it back then is really just crazy. I also want to address something that I think people that doesn't get talked about enough. In that I think there's a misinterpretation of what Star Wars is. Because Star Wars is so popular, people think it's supposed to be a prestige movie, and I think a lot of people, watched the original 3 movies and they really, really liked it. And in that time, it was really groundbreaking, really prestigious. So although it was goofy, it was taken very seriously because Harrison Ford was there, and you had legitimate actors. The I forgot Alec Guinness, who played Obi-Wan, was nominated for an Oscar for A New Hope. So it was taken way more seriously. So when A Phantom Menace comes out, George Lucas is trying to make this goofy Star Wars movie and get into the lore, which is what nerds like me want. But the general movie audience is like, oh, we're getting another prestige sci-fi movie. I think they kind of think it's supposed to be like, not exactly like Blade Runner, but like in that name. And so the movie when people think, oh, it's not that Star Wars fans hated it. It's that people, the general movie audience didn't like it, and they kind of get sucked in with the Star Wars audience. And so the narrative is, oh, Star Wars fans hated Star Wars. But that's not really the case. It's the general movie audience that, for the most part, doesn't like it, or I think it's frustrated that they like the original three, um, and kind of didn't like the prequels. And then you got new stuff. You got Clone Wars and Rebels and animated stuff. And the Star Wars trend just kind of kept on going, and they didn't really feel like keeping up. So I just feel like there's a lot of fans that have been left behind and who just like the original trilogy, which is fine, but that's not just what Star Wars is anymore. The last thing I want to talk about is just Jar Jar Binks and kind of the reception he got in 1999, and really how ridiculous it was. Rewatching this movie, how not a big deal it was. I mean, I understand not liking the character, but the reaction was so insane. Not only to him, but to Jake Lloyd, the child actor. Both Ahmad Best, who played Jar Jar, and Jake Lloyd, I thought did a fine job. um, I don't know what they wanted Jake Lloyd to do, especially as a child actor. I never had a problem with his acting at all. Maybe a few of the lines were cheesy, but it definitely wasn't him. And then when Ahmad Best, who luckily, I mean, he was suicidal at one point, it was so bad. But Jar Jar to me has always been like a core kind of character. I mean, the Darth Jar Jar stuff is some of my favorite theory ever in Star Wars, if not my favorite. And I'll do a separate video on that. But I just never understood the hate for these characters. It's really shocking. It's not like Jar Jar has way less screen presence than I remembered. So I just think it's crazy. It just shows you what the general movie audience was like in 1999. Pre 9/11. That this is what people were worrying about. That kind of era, as the internet was just kind of coming on, on board, was really, really nutty and insane. As crazy it is today, it might honestly have been crazier back then. In closing, regardless of what you think this movie, in my opinion, I think this movie just aged incredibly well. I think if you're a kid and you watch this today, it would look and feel similar to how I watched A New Hope as a kid in the 90s. Might even be better because I think the Star Wars battles, like the Darth Maul fight, looks way better years later than like the Darth Vader Obi-Wan fight that we got in A New Hope. So I really, really like this movie. I don't have it ahead of any of the originals. I don't have it ahead of Revenge of the Sith. Attack of the Clones is very tough for me. I'll get into that fight just because I just love Attack of the Clones. The love stuff is terrible, but everything else I love, and I'll do another video on that, especially with Django, Obi-Wan stuff. But yeah, in closing this movie, I think I definitely recommend go seeing it if you're a Star Wars fan and haven't seen it in a while. It's great to see a Star Wars movie in theaters. I think it's just one of the best experiences you can have. Um, so I'm excited to talk about more about the movies. But thanks, guys, for watching. This is my review of Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. Subscribe if you have gotten this far and like my video. Thanks, guys, for watching, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.